Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. I've got another exciting story for you today. The wind screamed across the open plains, tearing at the tatters of what remained of her world. Eloan stumbled forward, every step a battle against the invisible hands pushing her back, as if even the land itself wanted her to surrender. Behind her, smoke curled into the endless sky, black and bitter, the funeral pyre of everything she had once known. Her village, her family, her past, all gone in a single afternoon of fire and blood. She had not even screamed when the attack came. There had been no time, only the crash of hooves, the roar of rifles, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the earth. She had hidden beneath the body of her brother, feeling his lifeblood soak through her dress as raiders swept through like a plague. She had lain still long after the last gunshot echoed into silence, her heart a fragile, frantic drum. When she finally rose, it was to a world unrecognizable. The Lakota called these lands sacred. Today they felt cursed. Now, as twilight bled into the vast sky, Eloan walked. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not stay. Scavengers would return. Wolves, both the four-legged and the two. She pressed a hand against her ribs, feeling the bruises blooming beneath her skin, each breath sharp and raw. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but she had no food. Her moccasins were worn to threads. Her only weapon was a small broken knife she had pulled from the hand of a fallen warrior. The stars began to prick the sky one by one, distant and cold. Eloan remembered stories her grandmother had told, stories of spirits that watched from the stars guiding the lost. She tilted her face upward, searching for a sign, a voice, anything to tell her she was not utterly alone. A movement caught her eye, small, deliberate, from the ridge above. Her heart seized. Another raider, another scavenger. She staggered backward, knife trembling in her hand. A horseman sat silhouetted against the bruised sky, motionless as a stone, watching her. The moment stretched, breathless and brittle. Then, without a word, the rider nudged his horse forward, descending the slope with quiet, measured steps. Eloan's grip tightened on the knife. She was no one's prey, not anymore. She would fight or die standing. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The rider drew closer, the fading light stretching his shadow across the torn earth where Eloan stood rooted in place. His horse moved with a quiet grace, the beast's dark mane tossing in the restless wind. Eloan tightened her grip on the knife until her hand ached, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could see him clearly now, a Lakota warrior dressed in soft buckskin that clung to his lean frame, decorated with beads and feathers that whispered of stories she could not know. His face was carved from stone, neither young nor old, his eyes dark as the spaces between the stars. He stopped several feet away, the horse snorting softly, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other. Eloan's breath caught in her throat. He made no move to dismount, no motion to reach for a weapon. Instead he spoke, his voice low and even, carrying across the short distance between them. "You are alone." The words were not a question, but a statement, simple and heavy with understanding. Eloan's throat worked, but no sound emerged. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but stand frozen like a rabbit caught in a snare. Still, she did not move. The warrior regarded her for a moment longer, then slowly dismounted, keeping his hands visible, non-threatening. He moved with the weary patience of a man used to frightened creatures. Eloan flinched as he stepped closer, but stood her ground, willing herself to be something more than the broken girl who had survived by hiding. The warrior reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small piece of dried meat, setting it on a flat stone between them. Then he stepped back, giving her space. A gift, she realized, a peace offering. Her stomach twisted painfully with hunger, but suspicion held her rooted to the spot. Was it poisoned? Was it a trap? The man made no move to force her, simply waiting in the falling darkness, patient as the stars emerging overhead. Minutes dragged into an eternity. At last, the tremble in her limbs won over fear, and she darted forward, snatching the meat and retreating a few steps. She ate it without tasting, tears stinging her eyes at the simple relief of something in her stomach. The warrior watched, but did not approach. After a time, he spoke again, his voice softer now. "Come, you will not live the night alone." Eloan hesitated, torn between terror and the desperate will to survive. Slowly, heart hammering in her chest, she followed. The darkness deepened as Eloan followed the Lakota warrior across the battered plains, her steps hesitant, every instinct in her screaming caution. He walked ahead without looking back, his silhouette sharp against the scattered glow of distant stars, a silent guide through a world that no longer felt real. The land stretched endless and indifferent around them, whispering promises of death to those who traveled it alone. She kept her broken knife tight in her palm, though she knew it would do little against a man like him if he chose to turn. But he didn't. He led her to a hollow where the earth dipped gently between two low hills, offering some shelter from the merciless wind. There he motioned for her to sit and without a word said about building a fire. His movements were economical, practiced, no wasted effort. Eloan crouched at the edge of the light, trembling despite the fire's growing warmth. She watched him carefully, every flicker of flame casting shifting shadows across his face. He was focused, silent, dangerous, and yet he had not harmed her. When the fire crackled to life, he tossed her a bundle of rough cloth, a blanket, worn but whole. Another offering. She clutched it tightly, its coarse texture grounding her fraying nerves. He ate sparingly from a small leather pouch, offering her a second piece of dried meat, which she accepted with a muttered word of thanks barely above a whisper. The night air grew colder, creeping in through every tear in her clothing, but pride kept her from drawing closer to the fire. She sat stiffly, the blanket wrapped around her like armor, stealing glances at the warrior who had appeared from the midst of her shattered life. Who was he? Why help her? Questions burned in her mind, but she kept them locked behind her teeth. She had learned the hard way that trust was a currency too easily stolen. When he finally spoke, his voice was little more than a rumble, almost blending with the sighing of the wind. "You have a name?" Eloan hesitated, then answered, her voice dry as dust. "Eloan." He nodded once, solemn. "I am Matau." The name hung between them, a fragile bridge stretched across an abyss. Sleep did not come easily that night. She lay curled under the blanket, the fire a flickering shield against the darkness, her body aching, her spirit raw. Yet somehow, with Matau seated nearby, silent and watchful, Eloan found her eyes drifting closed, exhaustion dragging her into restless dreams. Dawn crept over the horizon like a ghost, painting the plains in muted gold and pale gray. Eloan stirred beneath the threadbare blanket, the chill of the earth pressing against her bones, her body stiff from a night of half-sleep. Matau was already awake, crouched near the dying fire, his back to her, scanning the vast emptiness with sharp, patient eyes. He moved like a man who expected trouble at any moment, and perhaps he was right. Trouble had found her easily enough. Without a word, he rose and began preparing the horses, his own dark, steady mount, and a second animal he must have captured during the chaos she had fled. Eloan watched wearily as he saddled the smaller horse, securing supplies she hadn't even realized he carried. Her heart thudded with uncertainty when he gestured for her to approach, pointing at the second horse. She hesitated, suspicion knotting her insides. Was he leading her somewhere to sell her, to trade her like so much stolen cloth? But survival shouted louder than fear. She approached clumsily, climbing into the saddle, her body protesting the unfamiliar motion. Matau mounted his horse with easy grace, glancing back once to make sure she followed. Then they set off, the morning wind cool against their faces, the only sounds the creak of leather and the whisper of hooves against dry grass. They traveled in silence, a fragile procession through a land that seemed to stretch forever, barren and beautiful, and filled with unseen dangers. Hours blurred together, broken only by brief stops to let the horses drink from shallow streams or graze where the grass was thickest. Matau said little, and Eloan was grateful. Words felt too heavy, too complicated. She focused instead on staying upright, on ignoring the hunger twisting in her belly and the fear gnawing at her heart. Every so often she caught Matau studying the horizon, his face a mask of grim concentration. He was watching for threats, she realized, protecting them both, though she could not imagine why. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the distant hills, her body ached with exhaustion and her mind drifted dangerously close to collapse. At last, Matau led them toward a rocky outcropping where a copse of stunted trees clung stubbornly to the earth. Shelter, rest, safety, if only for a moment. As she slid from the horse, nearly falling from weakness, Eloan understood something she had not dared to believe until now. She was not his prisoner, not yet. She was his responsibility. The evening settled heavy and slow, the sky bruising into deep purples and grays as thunderheads gathered on the horizon. Eloan huddled near the small fire Matau built beneath the shelter of twisted trees, the rough blanket drawn tightly around her shoulders. Her body still ached from the day's relentless ride, but it was the growing tension in the air that made her stomach twist with unease. Matau moved with deliberate efficiency, securing the horses and checking the perimeter with the vigilance of a man who trusted nothing, not even the land itself. She admired that about him, even as it fed the flicker of fear that never quite left her. Danger was not a distant rumor here. It rode the wind. It stalked the grass. It watched with unseen eyes. They ate little, some dried berries and a strip of smoked meat, and exchanged fewer words. Matau spoke only when necessary, each sentence short and firm, offering no comfort and asking for none. Eloan wondered what burdens he carried behind that steady gaze, what ghosts rode with him across these endless plains. As darkness swallowed the world, the first rumble of thunder rolled low across the earth. A warning more felt than heard. Eloan stiffened. Memories of storms crashing through the open lands flashing through her mind. Lightning setting fires, rain turning soil to treacherous rivers of mud. Matau met her gaze across the fire, reading her fear as easily as if she had spoken aloud. "We stay here," he said, voice low. "Better shelter than open ground." She nodded, trusting his judgment more than she trusted the wild uncertainty of her own instincts. The rain came slow at first, fat drops spattering against the leaves, the fire sputtering under the assault. Matau quickly covered it, preserving the embers for morning, then motioned her closer beneath the thicker canopy of the trees. She hesitated only a moment before obeying, drawing the blanket tighter as she crouched beside him. The storm broke fully then, sheets of rain slashing sideways, the wind howling like a wounded beast. They sat in near darkness, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Yet he did not touch her, did not crowd her. His presence was a shield, a silent promise against the chaos tearing at the world around them. As lightning ripped across the sky, illuminating the fierce angles of his face, Eloan realized that whatever this journey was, she was no longer facing it alone. When the storm finally spent itself, the world it left behind felt washed clean, yet broken, like a wounded animal licking unseen scars. Eloan stirred beneath the damp blanket, blinking up at a sky smeared with the faint gray of approaching dawn. Every muscle in her body ached, but the storm had not claimed her, and for that she was grateful. Matau was already awake, crouched by the fire's barely breathing embers, feeding it back to life with small, patient motions. He glanced at her once, a silent acknowledgement, before returning to his task. Without speaking, they gathered themselves and the horses, the exhaustion in their limbs matched only by the heaviness in the air. As they rode out, Eloan noticed the damage the storm had wrought: flooded gullies, fallen branches, the carcasses of small animals scattered across the sodden ground. Life and death danced closely here, a brutal truth she could no longer ignore. They traveled slower now, the horses picking their way carefully through the waterlogged earth. Around midday they came upon the ruins of a burned settlement. Little more than charred frames and blackened bones. Eloan felt the sting of memory, the fresh grief of her own village's destruction roaring back with cruel clarity. She tightened her grip on the reins, her stomach twisting. Matau dismounted, surveying the wreckage with a grim set to his jaw. Eloan followed more slowly, her steps reluctant, as if walking among ghosts. There was no sign of life, only the hollow remnants of what once was. A doll's shattered face staring blankly from the mud, a twisted iron kettle blackened beyond use, the skeletal remains of a cartwheel half buried in ash. "Was it your people?" she asked, her voice raw and uncertain. Matau shook his head. "Others." He did not elaborate, and she did not press. Some losses needed no names. They lingered only a short while before moving on, the silence between them heavier now, weighted by the countless dead who would never tell their stories. That night, when they made camp beneath a stand of crooked cottonwoods, Eloan sat close to the fire, the flames casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. Matau sat across from her, sharpening his blade with slow, rhythmic strokes. She watched him for a long time, gathering her courage like frayed threads in trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. For a moment she thought he would not answer. Then in a voice low as a prayer, he said, Because once someone saved me. The fire crackled low between them, throwing brief flickers of light across Matau's face, sharpening the hard lines carved by experience and loss. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken memories. Eloan wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, feeling the weight of her own unspoken grief pressing against her ribs. They were two survivors, adrift in a land that had no mercy left to offer. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood that some stories were too jagged to tell all at once. In the morning they resumed their journey, the land slowly rising into gentle hills that rolled beneath an endless weeping sky. Eloan noticed the change in Matau then, a subtle tightening of his posture, the way his eyes scanned the horizon more often, the way his hand never strayed far from the knife at his belt. She sensed it too, an unease threading through the earth itself. They were being watched. That afternoon, as they paused to water the horses at a shallow stream, Eloan caught her reflection in the water and barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner, cheeks hollowed by hunger and exhaustion, eyes too large, too weary. The girl who had hidden under her brother's body seemed a ghost now, replaced by someone harder, someone who understood that survival demanded sacrifice. Matau approached silently, crouching beside her, offering a handful of berries he had gathered. She accepted them without a word, their tartness a sharp contrast against the bitter taste of fear she could not swallow. "Soon," he said, his voice barely above the whisper of the stream, "we reach my people." Eloan nodded, though dread coiled in her gut. What would happen to her then? Was she to be handed over like a foundling, a burden passed from one pair of hands to another? Or something worse? She did not ask. Some answers were more terrifying than the questions. That night, as they camped beneath a stand of ancient pines, Matau handed her a second knife, a slender blade with a worn leather grip, clearly cared for despite its age. "For you," he said simply. Eloan turned the weapon over in her hands, feeling its surprising weight. A tool, a weapon, a symbol, a choice. She met Matau's gaze across the fire and for the first time did not look away. She was no longer simply a burden he carried across the plains. She was becoming something else, something stronger. The morning air was crisp, the breath of the earth cool against Eloan's cheeks as they broke camp and continued westward. Each mile brought a new ache to her muscles, but she no longer faltered in the saddle. The knife Matau had given her rested against her hip, a silent promise of the strength she was beginning to claim. The land grew wilder with each passing hour, hills steepening into rocky ridges, the trees thickening into a dense forest that muffled the world into hushed echoes of hoofbeats and distant bird calls. Matau's silence was different now, not a wall, but a shield, a quiet confidence that steadied her when fear tried to creep back into her mind. By midday, they reached a narrow valley carved by a silver stream, and Eloan saw the first signs of a village tucked against the shelter of a steep cliff. Smoke curled gently into the sky and figures moved between hide-covered lodges arranged in careful clusters. Her heart twisted in her chest, a knot of hope and terror. Matau slowed his horse, glancing back at her with a look that spoke of things he did not say aloud. She understood. Whatever awaited her beyond those lodges, she must face it with open eyes. They rode into the village together, drawing the curious stares of children and weary glances from women tending fires and gathering herbs. Warriors emerged from the shadows of the lodges, their gazes sharp and questioning, their bodies taut with the readiness of men who knew how easily peace could shatter. Matau spoke to them in his language, words flowing low and firm, and though she understood nothing, she caught the weight behind them, the way the men's stances softened slightly as they listened. A tall man approached, his hair braided with hawk feathers, his eyes hard but not unkind. He and Matau exchanged brief words before the chief's gaze fell on Eloan, piercing and measured. She straightened her spine, refusing to flinch under his scrutiny. She had survived too much to shrink now. After a long moment, the chief nodded once, a silent acceptance, and gestured for Matau to bring her forward. As she dismounted, her legs unsteady, but her heart fierce, Eloan realized she stood on the edge of something vast and unknown. She was neither settler nor Lakota, neither captive nor free. She was suspended between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. And yet, for the first time, the ground beneath her feet felt real. The village buzzed with low conversation as Eloan was led through its heart. the people parting around her like the tide, curious eyes following her every step. Matau walked beside her, a steady presence, but he offered no words of comfort, and she did not ask for them. This was her trial, and she would meet it alone. The chief guided them to a large lodge at the village's center, its entrance flanked by two elder women whose faces bore the deep lines of wisdom and time. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and sage, and a circle of elders waited, their gazes heavy with expectation. Eloan's hands trembled slightly as she stepped into the lodge, but she kept her chin high, refusing to let fear hollow her out again. She had crossed burning fields, buried her dead, survived storms and hunger and blood. Whatever judgment these strangers passed upon her, she would face it standing. The chief spoke first, his voice calm but firm, a rhythmic cadence that wove through the air like a drumbeat. Matau translated in low, careful English. "You come from death," he said. "You carry sorrow, but the earth has spared you. Why?" The question hung between them, not demanding an answer, but offering a challenge. Eloan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their stares press against her. She thought of her brother's blood on her hands, of the night spent shivering beneath strange stars, of the long silent miles with Matau across a wounded land. She thought of the girl she had been and the woman she was becoming. "Because I refuse to die," she said, her voice low but steady. "Because there is still something in me that wants to live." A murmur rippled through the lodge, a mixture of surprise and consideration. One of the elder women leaned forward, studying her with sharp, knowing eyes, and after a long moment she spoke in Lakota, her tone softer, almost approving. Matau offered no translation, but Eloan understood enough. They saw her not as a threat, not as a burden, but as a survivor. As the fire crackled and shadows danced along the lodge walls, the chief spoke again, and this time Matau's translation carried the weight of ceremony. "You may stay among us. If your spirit proves strong, you may become one of us." Relief and fear warred within her, but beneath it all bloomed something fierce and unfamiliar. Hope. The days that followed unfolded like the slow unfurling of new leaves after a long winter, each moment tentative, each breath filled with cautious possibility. Eloan worked beside the Lakota women, gathering herbs, weaving hides, mending tools, her hands clumsy at first, but growing steadier with each passing sunrise. The children stopped staring and began to smile when she passed, their laughter bright against the backdrop of endless sky. The warriors no longer watched her with suspicion, but with quiet respect, recognizing in her the same resilience that the land demanded of them all. Matau remained her silent anchor through it all, always near but never imposing, allowing her the space to find her footing, yet ready to catch her should she stumble. At night, around the great fire in the center of the village, the people shared stories of hunts, of spirits, of great battles lost and won. Eloan listened more than she spoke, letting the rhythm of their language seep into her bones until it became not foreign but familiar. Sometimes Matau would sit beside her, and though their words were few, their silences grew warm, threaded with something deeper than gratitude or necessity. It was on one such night, as embers floated like stars into the darkened sky, that Matau turned to her fully, the firelight etching every line of his face in golden shadow. "You have the heart of the Lakota," he said, voice roughened by smoke and feeling. Eloan's throat tightened. She had lost everything once. Family, home, the fragile certainties that had crumbled under gunfire and ash. Yet here, among a people not her own, she had found something unexpected. Not just survival, not just a new place to sleep. She had found belonging. She had found strength. She had found him. Matau reached out then, not with command, not with pity, but with a quiet offering, his hand brushing hers in a touch so gentle it stole her breath. No grand declarations, no promises wrapped in fragile words. Just this, the solid, simple truth of presence, of choice. Eloan looked at their joined hands, then up into his dark, steady gaze, and for the first time since the world had ended, she smiled. The past would never release its grip entirely, but the future was no longer a barren wasteland, stretching into forever. It was here, around this fire, in the warmth of a people who had every reason to turn her away, and had instead chosen to draw her close. And it was with Matau, whose strength had never sought to cage her, but had instead taught her how to fly. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.